I have to confess up front that I'm not a big fan of the culture of constantly taking offense, which seems to be ruining our civilization. So I'm pretty unclear on the concept here. Is the idea that in the long term, somebody should be paying a 10% penalty for an echo of someone else's culture? Is it about money in some way? When an Afro-American eats a piece of pizza, should he be giving a 10% penalty to the culture of Italy? When Nas X cuts a country music album, is he supposed to be paying a penalty to the Academy of Country Music? I'm really murky on the concept here. I think it's a detestable way for our civilization to go. Help me understand this.
So a couple things. First of all, context is key. One of the reasons why you see this reaction, particularly from African Americans and anything to do with Black culture, is because of a history. And it's really long, in popular music. The history of other groups coming in, taking elements of the culture, and not referring back to the culture, passing it off as their own. So people think that that's the original when there's a whole history and a whole tradition related to that. In the 1950s was a really interesting example, but you also see it in rhythm and blues that came before. So when people feel, and that's what Jacob B. was getting at, when people feel like they see that again, they think about all of those instances. Even now, rock historians are all agreed that rock started with Black music. But if you ask your average rock music listener, they will not know that there is that really basic connection at its root. At the same time, though, people are very vehement about having culture, what Baba, talks about as ownership over culture. At the same time, they don't remember that the very culture that they're so protective of is a hybrid culture and wouldn't be there if it wasn't for interracial music production. So there are at least two factors at play. And the problem is there's not a lot of language that people use or have access to get at the nuances. It's just, I saw that thing, that makes me feel some type of way.
Yeah, and I can answer that. Having grown up in Hawaii, I'm quite familiar with tourist culture, tourists and tourist industry. In Hawaii, what you have is Hawaiian native culture, which the people themselves consider very sacred, cartoonized or caricaturized by corporations, such as the tourist industry, for their own profit. The poorest people, the people who occupy the prisons, who have the least education access, are the native Hawaiians. Their culture, hula, surfing, whatever it may be, is appropriated by multi-corporate businesses for their own profit, and all they can do, these Hawaiian youth, is hope for a job in the industry which pays minimum wage. So yes, maybe we should pay the Hawaiian people 80% of profits.
In your paper, are you saying that the K-pop bands or K-pop girl bands are acknowledging working with African American producers, writers, and it's not the same thing as taking the information and stealing it and using it, passing it off as your own? You're saying that Korean groups actually say, hey, we embrace this collaboration. We want to work with these artists. We know where this music is coming from. Let's work together. Is that that's basically what you're saying in your paper?
Yes. So.
Got it.
Yes.
I guess based off that follow-up, I wonder, have you, during the course of your studying for this paper and things, did you see instances of groups or companies acknowledging the fact that, that they're taking this and translating it and doing it? Because I feel like a lot of the music that we see from them, it's, yes, they're taking that information and they're using it, but they're not referring back to where that originally came from. They're not it's not, I think as you pointed out, it's not to demean, it's not to be negative, it's just that ignorance of where this came from, and they're just using this for their own profit.
Yes, I have. I can point you to those. First of all, on KPK K-Pop Collective, my colleague has done digital documentation of the SM Entertainment website, which has pictures of Yu Yeonjin doing his album, and there are pictures of Coolio, and he's credited not only on the album, in the liner notes, in the copyright information on the song, but picture evidence he was in the studio actually doing this thing. So one place where you see that, if we care to look, and it's kind of hard now with the digitization of music, liner notes was always the place where you would find out who's working on what and what contribution they had. So the Korean music copyright database, if you can navigate it with this very weird romanization, will actually list everybody on an album, and including American producers. African American producers are not shy about telling you that they work with K-pop groups. When K-pop artists are asked the question by media, they will tell you who they're listening to, who they're influenced by. So part of the dynamic that we have now is that we don't have a discourse that elicits that, but that information is out there. And when you listen to what African American music producers say about working with K-pop groups, and this is very interesting, they say that it is a legitimate, authentic collaboration.
And if you go back, I mean, if you could find the video of when BTS first came on the scene in the United States, and they first came here to train with R&B and rap artists, it's very interesting. So the information is out there that this collaboration's been going on for a long time.
I'm gonna go in a completely different direction. I hope nobody minds. But we talked about, Professor Robert Koo talked about the change of image in ramen, but I don't recall if you mentioned the change in image of Jajangmyeon itself, because I'm sure that changed as well, especially as it's become more popular to eat as a commonality. Like people, I'm assuming people eat it like when they move in, on move-in days. People are like, oh, we're going to eat Jajangmyeon now. So I wonder if you just go into a little bit of how the image of Jajangmyeon has changed.
Yeah, thanks for that. Ramen and Jajangmyeon both, I think, have rising and falling fortunes. It changes meaning over time. Jajangmyeon initially was one of the sort of luxury foods. If you're poor, it was a way you could actually have some meat. You can go out to eat at a Chinese restaurant. It was kind of a fancy thing. It was a treat for kids and for celebrations and so forth. But more importantly, both ramen and Jajangmyeon exist because of the lack of rice that was available. So the government wanted to increase the consumption of wheat. And so what was a moment of desperation in terms of poverty and so forth, the Koreans took wheat and made into all these other things like breads and sujebi and so forth. Now with Jajangmyeon, initially I think early on it was seen as quite high status. In the 90s actually fell out of favor. Many Koreans who were coming of sort of more affluent saw in Jajangmyeon sort of the worst kind of dirty, the stereotype you can imagine about Chinese people and food, right? So there was a kind of downturn for a while of Jajangmyeon representing unhealthy, greasy food. And so if you were going on a date, you would not want to take your date to a Jajangmyeon place as your parents might have. But it's once again changed, right? Because it's so delicious and it's like pizza in New York City. It's everywhere. And so I think right now, Jajangmyeon and ramyeon both have a kind of neutral, I think, meaning. However, on your birthday alone, don't eat ramyeon. That's very sad. Right? So there's up and down fortunes. It's so slippery. It's hard to pin down.
I also had a food-related question. I was wondering if you can explain a little bit more about the videos, the Japanese advertisements. So you're seeing Korean pop stars doing an advertisement about instant ramen for Japanese consumption because the Korean way of cooking it is special, or because it is cool, or because it's recognizably new and Korean?
Yeah, there's a big cultural exchange between Japan and Korea. Koreans consume a lot of Japanese products, but they don't like to admit it. Japanese consume a lot of Korean products, and they kind of admit it, but they're sort of self-hate about it, oftentimes. Most of the K-pop successful groups and artists, they want to make it to Japan. Korea is their first domestic goal, but they want to conquer Japan next. And then now, of course, it's expanded to the world and United States and China, everywhere else. So Tiara, during that time, 2012 or so, they were very, very popular as a pop group, as a K-pop group in Japan, but they were singing all their songs in Japanese. And so they were so popular, they were, and then meanwhile, Nongshim, the company who owns the Shin Ramen, wanted to also conquer the Japanese market. Right? So they advertised heavily in Japan. So it's the Korean style of ramen is very particular in that it is very spicy, most of it. Even when it says not spicy, it's spicy. And so those commercials were shot by individual Tiara members who were teaching the audience a different technique of making a different recipe for Shin Ramen.
I think going back to the previous conversation where you said typically you have to go search. So I still feel like it's a little hush-hush that the collaboration is still going on, and it's not very prevalent within the general population of like Korea. So I wanted to see, what are your thoughts on that collaboration, and how has that impacted the view of African American people within the Korean community?
I can't tell you about what's going on in Korea, but I can tell you that I think that media plays a role in who knows what. And so if you have media who are only asking who's your ideal type, then they're not asking who might you be influenced on this record.
Hi, I have a food-related question. So mukbangs are becoming very popular on like YouTube. Do you think that's correlated with the prosperity of K-pop, or is it its own entity?
I think both. I think there are certain non-Korean mukbangers on YouTube who are heavily influenced by the Korean mukbangers. But then there is a whole host of other mukbangers who are up and coming who actually know very little about anything Korean. In fact, their inspiration are the earlier non-Korean that they used to watch. So it's become almost like this sort of a domino effect. And so by the third, fourth generation, the Koreanness may vanish, but the word mukbang seems to be enduring, right? So the other thing I noticed because I'm sort of also in my book, I'm doing something on mukbangs. So I've been watching a lot of mukbangs. What I'm noticing is that African Americans make up a large percentage of the mukbangs that I'm seeing in my YouTube feed. And I'm not sure if, I need to see whether or not in fact there is a in terms of numbers, right? A large number of, especially a large number of African Americans in it, or am I just getting a weird algorithm on my page? But I suspect that it's not, because I'm reading a lot of media pieces about mukbangs. That's in the United States now, everyone's writing about it. And African Americans feature prominently. So I'm actually wanting to, at some point, talk to people about if there's a racial element as the United States, growing up being black in America, because Korea, I think, for me, the mukbang is symptomatic of eating disorder of Korea. They're overeating because they experienced hunger. And symbolically, they're gorging themselves, and I'm sure off camera they're purging themselves, right? But this is a symptom of overabundance. And I think in some sense, this idea of hunger that you compensate for by overeating is maybe something that African Americans themselves experience in this country because of the legacy of slavery and everything else. But I need to look further into that.
Hey, so going back to music, I did wonder, so we had the idea of like Elvis Presley, when he first began, he essentially stole music from the Black community, and then his career stepped off. I did wonder, though, we do have a big propensity as far as music goes, where soul music is very much the main part of a music genre. Take Mamamoo, they're known for soul, and I really enjoy that. But where do we go forward when you have cases where they're still having problems with blackface or doing something else out of people that have said from the beginning, we love this genre, we love what we're doing, we want to show this to more people. But on the opposite side, you're still having a problem with, I don't want to say cultural appropriation, but not necessarily understanding that what they do is hurting people.
I think part of that has to do with the circulation of cultures in general. I think that if you think about if you are consuming foreign cultures, you know, through television shows or movies or music, do you know what's offensive in that culture? So once again, that's why I made this this is why I think that we need something that accounts for this continuum. Because blackface, if it's meant to, you know, demean or mock, that is straight up blackface, straight out of the 19th century. I also think when it comes to Korea, we also have to take into consideration the context of American imperialism and the long time American presence in East Asia, the conduit through which those negative racial performances came. So for us in the United States, we see blackface and we have a certain kind of reaction to it. And this is not to excuse it, but it's to provide, once again, the context that you have to go through in order to explain it or to account for it, which I don't think often happens. Also, some people, because I go through you type in cultural appropriation in K-pop, you get a whole bunch of stuff back. But if you look at the actual number, somebody actually said that blackface was rampant in K-pop. And I'm like, that's not true. But that's the perception that happens, because if you see it once, it must be everywhere else. So one of the things that I'm just arguing for is more precise language in what we're talking about, because if everything is negative cultural appropriation, then we don't have anywhere to go to talk about what else is going on.
Yeah, just to second your point, for 70 years or more, I think American hegemony culturally of Korea had an impact. And Koreans have learned very well American style of racism. And so it's not surprising when you see a very American notion of racial difference and hostility manifesting in Korea, because I think there's a long-standing relationship that's been there.
I just want to make a quick comment about ramen. So, Nongshim must have a very big pride in ramen. I mean, they're the first company to mass-produce ramen in Korea. And I know that the order of...
I think Samyang might have been. Samyang was. Samyang was first.
Samyang was the first. Yeah. Because of it was the interview that I heard on Korean television that when Shin Chino, the owner of Nongshim, first told his brother, who is the owner of Lotte, Shin Gyoko, that he wanted to mass produce ramen. And his brother said that, Korea didn't have the technology to produce ramen yet. So, it's like only advanced countries like Japan can do that. So, he was very discouraged, but then he kind of went against it anyways, and then it became...
Yeah, that might be an apocryphal story he's telling, because it's been written about that Nongshim, the particular gentleman, went to Japan, saw the Nissan company's production under Momofuku and so forth, and he came back to Korea with that technology, and he copycatted even the label design of the first Samyang product. Anyway.
I see. So, I thought, okay, so Korean K-pop stars actually went to Japan to kind of like promote, Korean style ramen. It's like, kind of a inverse the colonialism, kind of like a colonial kind of, idea, in a way. So I thought it was kind of a pretty interesting. But originally I had a question for Dr. Anderson. Sorry. So I really liked your topic. I think it can provoke a lot, or it can actually, like, a lot of scholars can approach the topic in different ways. I think one of the maybe because I'm a history student and I try to kind of come up with different ways when I hear a history topic. When you talk about like if you want to study on like distinctive Koreanness about R&B or hip hop, probably they can study lyrics. I'm sure lyrics can be very different from sort of like American lyrics, even though it's the same genre. And then, but also, I noticed that a lot of, Korean singers, when they sing like R&B or, hip hop, they try to look like black people in a way. So it kind of changed the aesthetic or a standard, or kind of where I guess the Korean diversified, kind of like diversified the aesthetics or the standard of beauty or the looks. And then I think that could be an interesting idea. But my original question is that earlier one of the quotes that you showed is that. So the person, I guess it was a Korean, who said that it's from the United States, who is like that is an imperial power, and the Korean, who is sort of like kind of covenant in a way. But I thought the reason of R&B, and then it's like I guess hip hop. Are they like a Caribbean origins, or actually they're from Africa originally? I mean, America certainly had a power to institutionalize and market, to create a big market. But then, if you look at the origin of the music, I thought it was from Africa directly. I mean, through like went to Caribbean island.
Hip hop originates in the United States. Now, if you're talking about, if you want to take a long-term view in terms of talking about the rhythmic foundation of a lot of Black popular music, some scholars have traced that all the way back to Africa. There are ethnomusicologists who have done that. Then there are also music historians who say that the American manifestation, so starting from R&B, starting from rhythm and blues forward in the United States, it's a hybrid. And you really can't kind of slice it up. It's a hybrid.